all kinds of storms that we go through. I talked to one person this week, and they said, boy, that church, as far as I'm concerned, that's the least thing from my mind right now with what I'm going through. In other words, they had a storm in their personal life much worse than a roof blowing off. I heard somebody else say, boy, that storm, and they all lit up like a Christmas tree and said, that's a blessing in disguise. So we look at storms in very, very different fashions. And we've all gone through some very, very serious storms in our life, and we're all going to go through some more. Storms of sorrow, storms of suffering, storms of losing maybe your business, maybe, I don't know, all kinds of storms that we have to go through. And it's just a natural part of life, but it doesn't make it any easier. So what it brought me to is to think about an actual physical storm that the disciples and Christ went through themselves. And what kind of application could I make to my own personal life? Let me give you, oh, by the way, something's being handed down the roads by these gals. If you don't want them, don't take them, but there's a notepad. You can make airplanes out of them, but don't make spit wads because these people have to clean up. Okay, and an airplane is pretty easy to pick up. But anyway, in case you want to make a note or two when I get there. But it brought me to the idea that Christ and the disciples themselves actually went through physical storms, not so much different than what some of you people went through. Let me give you the setting of this storm. My wife told me not to pace too much, but I'm a natural pacer. I can't see a clock, so if you see her doing this, she says, that's enough. Okay? So anyway, let me give you the setting of the storm that these people are going to go through. Christ was very popular. His teaching was very popular. People liked to hear him. People liked to ask questions. And wherever he went, he seemed to attract a crowd. And on the day that this is going to happen is no different. He is somewhere close to the Sea of Galilee. He's wandering around, and the crowds are gathering, and he's teaching them. In fact, the crowd gets so big that at one point during the day, midday, by the way, it's very hot over there midday, they like to get in the shade. In midday, he was in the house. I don't know if that was the reason he was in a house or not. But the crowd was so big around the house that not even his family or the other disciples could get in and see Christ. He was in there teaching. And the crowds just kept growing and growing and growing. At some point, he left the house and walked down to the shore of the Sea of Galilee. The crowd followed him. The crowd even grew bigger. In fact, it got to be such a big crowd that Christ gets in the boat and pushes offshore a little bit so that he can broadcast his voice. He didn't have one of these, I don't think. Broadcast his voice to as many people as could hear him. He had had a really, really busy day. He was tired. The disciples were really tired. And that's where we're going to pick up. We're going to pick up the story of him saying to those people, if you turn to Mark, as you'll see, I'm kind of slowing down so the papers all get through. If you'll see Mark chapter 4 and turn to verse 35. I want to examine this just a little bit closer and see if there's anything that we can learn from it ourselves. If we were over at the other church, I could tell you which page to turn to, because we have pew Bibles, but I can't do that, and I'm sure quite a few of you don't have Bibles, so I will try to go fairly slowly through this. But they find themselves on this shore, and in verse 35 it says, "That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let's go over to the other side and leave the crowd behind.'" He's tired. He wants to leave the crowd behind. He wants to get to the other shore. Now you need to know something about the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is about 17 miles long. It's about 10 miles wide at its widest spot, and it's kind of shaped like an egg. These people, these disciples, some of them had been fishermen before they got called. They'd fished in this sea a whole lot. They knew this sea. The Sea of Galilee is oriented north to south, and from Turkey, if you can think of your map in your head, from Turkey going south, there's this huge gorge, and it's a fairly straight gorge, and it has cut down through the layers of earth, and it runs into the Sea of Galilee. And by the way, just so you get an idea, the Sea of Galilee is about the same surface area as Yellowstone National Park. I looked it up. There's a lot more water in Yellowstone because Yellowstone's 390 feet deep at its deepest. Sea of Galilee is only 150 feet at its deepest. Yellowstone has twice as much shoreline because it's got all of these little peninsulas going in and out. And the Sea of Galilee is more of an egg shape. Anyway, the river comes down through that gorge and dumps into the Sea of Galilee, which is 680 feet below sea level. Below sea level. Meaning, hey, where's the water going to go? Well, it empties out into the Jordan River and goes on down to the Dead Sea. Now, the Sea of Galilee is not really a sea, it's a lake. It's fresh water. Okay? It has about 18, most of you people will be interested in this, I'm sure, especially you women. The Sea of Galilee has 18 to 20 species of fish. Okay? 10 of them are considered edible. And so fishermen fished the sea almost constantly. By the way, St. Peter's fish, there's a fish called St. Peter's fish, and guess what? It's tilapia. Any of you ever eaten tilapia? Well, that's one of the fish that the disciples would have been familiar with and would have fished for in the Sea of Galilee. Well, we find that Christ says to them, let's go to the other side. Little did the disciples know what was in store for them going across that sea. I probably should also tell you this. Sea of Galilee can get very rough. There have been recorded on that small lake waves as high as 20 feet. But the waves almost always happen at midday when the hot winds off of the desert come down that chute, you know, like a wind tunnel, and whip up the water. It almost never happens after dark when the cool air is starting to rise back up that valley. It's kind of interesting because it plays a part in his story. Anyway, Christ says, let's go to the other side. And so they're in the boat, and let me read this entire portion for it to you, and then we'll try and pick it apart. Mark 5, verse 35 through 41. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side," leaving the crowd behind. They took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with them. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Be still, quiet." Then the wind died down, and the sea became completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Well, if you have your little piece of paper, let me start with that. And there's some pens. I don't know if you got a pen. Did you get them all out, girls? Okay.
We have pens if anybody needs more.
Oh, by the way, there's a whole packet of pens. Anybody else want one? Yeah, okay.
They're mine, and I got them.
They are landed, so please.
Thanks a lot. But anyway, we're going to use this story, and it's important. I named this talk "A Night on the Sea." A Night on the Sea. And it's a true story as well as an analogy for life. One of the definitions of an analogy is this: a parallel between the workings of nature and those of human experience. Okay, I wrote that out for you just so you understand that is one of the definitions. A parallel between the workings of nature and those of human experience. So, as we look at verse 37, we see that they're crossing the sea, the lake, and in Matthew especially it says, suddenly. Suddenly. A furious storm blew up. In other words, things were all right at one moment in time. At the next moment in time, everything broke loose. I just picture somebody sitting at your supper table, your cell phone ringing. You're putting it to your ear and you're, what? In other words, a suddenness. Your world changed with one phone call. Okay, that can happen in our lives, can't it? That's kind of the thing that we got here going with this boat. They're going across it. We don't know if it was the widest part or the narrowest part, but they're going across in this boat that's got 12 people or 14 people or however many in it to get to the other side. And all of a sudden, the waves came up. You say, well, there shouldn't have been so many people in the boat. I understand that. I really understand that. I was down in old Mexico one time doing a big horn sheep hunt, and the host said to us, "Let's go fishing." It was the middle of the day, and I thought, well, we'll go fishing. He takes us down, and this host is wealthy. I assumed a boat. We got there, it was like a rowboat with a 7 or 10 horse engine on it, and we were going to go out in the Sea of Cortez. Sea of Cortez is 1,000 times bigger than the Sea of Galilee. There were 6 of us. This was a rowboat from here to her. When we all got in it, the water was only that far from coming in. If the wind had blown 2 miles an hour, we'd have sunk. Okay? So I've never been close to death that I know of on a boat in a storm. Thank the good Lord it wasn't a storm that day. Nothing. It was quiet as could be. But we sometimes, sometimes something, I would have asked for that. If something had happened there, it wouldn't have been anybody's fault but my own, would it? I tried to get out. But you know how they make you feel this big if you aren't brave enough to do what everybody else is doing?
Did you catch any fish?
Yeah, we had 2 fishing poles for 6 of us. And they drag it over and we caught a couple fish for dinner. I was so happy those fish bit I wanted. You know, they said, well, we're not going to go out very far. We're only going to go out a little ways. I said, but I sink like a rock. I don't have to be very far out. You know, if it's over my head, I'm in trouble. Anyway, that's not the story. But here is all of a sudden a storm comes up. Verse 37. Good 1 minute, trouble the second. The severity of it. It was a furious storm. It was a furious storm. It was something that could sink them. Just like I've had some troubles along life that could sink me. Or at least I thought so at the time. You know, lots of times storms come and you see them coming, you kind of get ready for them. Other times you see them coming and you worry about them, and they go north. They go around town. They don't get you. You know, all kinds of things, all kinds of scenarios pop up. But this storm was very furious. It nearly swamped them. Now, the question that is often asked when we go through a storm is, where did this thing come from? It makes very little difference where the storm comes from. God can almost always use a storm to teach us something. Okay? Some storms are natural. Okay? The source is natural. It's a pattern of nature. Some storms are just, I think the storm downtown probably was just a pattern of nature. Some storms I bring on myself. I got in that stinking boat, which I shouldn't have. And I was scared for quite a while till they would get me back on solid ground. It was a little bit of a storm, at least in my mind it was a storm. I wanted back on solid ground. The Bible teaches that some storms, the source could be God. God brings storms for teachings and discipline. Now, I know some of you are going to argue, I don't think God ever brings bad things in your life. Well, you would have to argue with David when you get up there. In 2 Samuel, you'll see that it clearly says God brought trouble. You might ask the Egyptians, if any of them made it. Oh, I don't know how to say that. Because those plagues, it says that God sent those. Okay? And we know that the righteous and the unrighteous get treated equally here on earth. So if they're going to get them, they're going to get us. Lots of times. So God is capable. The other source is Satan. The last source, the third source. Satan. Satan can attempt to destroy the work of Christ. He does attempt to destroy the work of Christ. I had not really thought about Satan trying to drown Jesus. I know he tried to get him to jump off a cliff, and he didn't think that was a good idea. But I never gave a thought that maybe he was doing it. In fact, we don't know. There's no telling us here in these verses what the source of this storm was. However, there may be a clue. In verse 39, if you will let me read that to you again, he got up and he said to the wind, to the waves, which were caused by the wind, quiet, be still. Quiet, be still. That's how it's in your Bible, if you've got the NIV. Now, stop and think. You got a neighbor that's got this little mutt dog, okay, that yips all the time. Yip, 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 you know, just constantly yipping. I'm going to go outside and I'm going to say to my neighbor's dog, please, quiet. Would you please be still? Who's laughing at me? You know me? I'm not likely to do that. I'm likely to say, shut up, you mutt. Right? That's what I'm more apt to say. Well, what I want you to understand is in this word that Jesus used in the Hebrew, and back in Mark 1, the word he used was a word that you would do to muzzle an irritating animal. So I don't know, because it doesn't tell us, but it is as if he's blaming Satan for bringing the storm up. It doesn't really say that. It could be natural. It could be something that Satan was trying to do to destroy the work of Christ and the work of the disciples. But the clue is that he was trying to quiet a wild animal. I kind of think of Satan as a wild animal, don't you? I kind of do. Okay, so anyway, while we don't know that, it was a night of great danger, as we set up at the top. It was also a night of doubt. Doubt. Doubt crept in. Let's look at the words. Verse 36. Verse 36, and I would have, if I'd been a disciple, I'd have missed this too. I wouldn't even thought about this. He says, let us, I guess it's verse 35. Yeah. Let us go over to the other side. Let us go over to the other side. It's a comment. They doubted his comment. Well, I hadn't thought of this. He is saying, disciples, we're going to go to the other side. He wanted them to take that kind of as a promise, I guess. He already knew what was going to happen. He already knew they were going to get to the other side, whether or not there was something in between. I would have missed that if I'd been a disciple. I don't see very well beyond the length of my nose as far as how things are going to turn out. But he did. There was a little, I don't blame the disciples for missing this. Nor do I blame people for sometimes missing signals. Because lots of times we miss signals, don't we? We should have seen something coming. Anyway, there's a little bit of doubt shows here. They doubted that he cared. Look at verse 38. My wife hasn't gone like this yet. Look at verse 38. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? Christ was really tired. He was on a cushion. He was sound asleep, and the waves were whipping up. I don't know how he could sleep through that, but anyway, that's what the story says. And the disciples, how did they have the audacity to even think that he didn't care? He had taken care of them for I don't know how long throughout their walk with him. He'd shown that he cared many times. But they're saying, are you going to let me die this way? You're going to let me be swamped by this storm? Is this the thing that's going to do me in? I see some people saying, I think I've been there, wondering if they haven't had that thing. There was a little doubt that he cared. He does care. He promises to care for us. In fact, I have several verses I'm not going to have time to go through because of time constraints, but he has shown care for us people over and over and over. The third thing, they questioned his total control. Verse 41, who can this be? Who can this be? I think if I traveled with Christ all this time, not very long, a couple of years, maybe a year and a half, and I'd seen everything that he'd done up to this point, would I have asked the question, who is this guy? There was a little doubt in their minds, even when they woke him up, that he could do it. I've been there. I've never been there where I thought he couldn't do it. I've sure been there when I thought he might not want to. And he might not bail me out, or this storm may not, there may not be any rainbow to this particular storm. We've all probably been there one time or another. But anyway, there was a little bit of doubt that crept in their minds. We all know head knowledge. We all know that he's in control, don't we? But we don't always practice it. I don't. Maybe I'm just speaking to myself. I don't always act like I know he's in control. In fact, I have a habit. I probably told you this before. I have a habit to go down kind of through a priority list. And if the last thing on that list, that sequence is me, and if I can't get it taken care of, then I might pray about it. Anybody relate to that? You kind of like to get yourself out of this storm. You kind of feel responsible because you kind of know you got yourself into it. Because maybe God's disciplining me. Maybe he's trying to teach me something. I don't want to go through the storm, so I'm going to try to get myself out of it as best I can. Anyway, I think that can happen. We know he's in total control, but we don't always practice it. The last point that I have is it was a night of discovery. A night of discovery. As most storms can be, there is a learning that can go on if we're open to be taught. No matter what the source, natural, Satan brings it in our life, God says, I'm going to test you here. No matter what the source is, there can be learning. And there was a lot of learning going on that night, discovery. Night of discovery. First of all, in verse 39, there was discovery of the power of the Lord. Power. They were amazed. What do you suppose the disciples wanted him to do? When they were scared to death out there in the middle of the water, what would they have wanted him to do? Would they have wanted him to pick up the boat and set it over there and say, hey, let's get out of this weather? Would they have wanted him to put or get it behind it and swim hard and push the boat through it. I don't know what they would have wanted. Okay? All they wanted is to save their bacon, their neck. They were scared. When he said, "Be still," or "Shut up, devil," I don't know what he said. "Calm down." I have no idea. Ooh, that is loud, isn't it? I have no idea. I don't know what the disciples expected to happen right then. I bet you that knowing the personalities of a couple of them, they expected the wind to stop right there. And knowing the personality of a couple others of them, as best we can get through the scriptures, I bet they're going to say, "Now we'll wait and see how this works out." Okay? We'll see how this works out. Again, we've all been there. Okay? But he spoke, and the wind obeyed his voice. Wow. Somebody obeyed his voice. Natural, whatever, I don't know. Second point. A night of discovery. Sect B. About the promises of the Lord. It was discovery about the promises of the Lord. Again, we go back to that verse where it says, "Let's go to the other side." We're going to go over to the other side. We're going to be over there. We're going to go do our thing over there. The disciples probably just thought, "Okay, this is a promise, and we'll get in the boat and we'll start to the other side." She's having fits with me wandering around with that camera, but that's okay, because I don't care if I'm right or wrong. But anyway, it was a promise. If you examine that carefully, you see that he's saying, we're actually going to arrive on the other side. Let's go to the other side. To Jesus, that was just, he knew his Father was going to take care of him. He knew his work wasn't done. He knew that whatever was out on the lake, a shark attack or whatever. By the way, it's Shark Week. That ought to be, we ought to bring that in somewhere. Whatever it was going to be, he had confidence. He knew that his Father wasn't done with him here on earth yet. And he knew they were going the other side. The disciples missed it totally. So would I. If there's anybody in here that would have got that, you don't belong here. You need to be somewhere else. Anyway, it was a night of promise. About the presence. It was a discovery about the presence of the Lord. You know, if you look at verse 35 and 6, it says there were a lot of other boats out on that lake at the same time. They went through the same storm, I would suspect. I wonder what happened to them. I wish it would tell us what happened to them. I bet they were scared spitless. Don't you? I mean, they didn't even have Jesus there that they could ask to help. I wonder what the... I think that's a great metaphor for we Christians. If we're in his boat, we got an advantage. I'm sorry, Christine. We have a big advantage. We can personally ask him. "Oops, I got the marksman." Okay. And that's a big advantage. So, the presence of the Lord was a discovery for them. And the last one is about the peace of the Lord. The peace. disciples were fretting and stewing and knowing they were going down in the drink. Probably they were out there quite a ways. We don't know. And Christ is just calm, sleeping, because he knows the end. He knows the future. We don't. It's not easy for us to be calm and collected when a storm comes by. I can only imagine how I'm going to say frustrated, but I don't know if that's the right word, you people were, and how anxious you were for a few minutes when that storm went through. I mean, you know, it can get your attention, and it can really rattle you for a few minutes. Even a natural thing like that. All I can say is, you know, somewheres in this, there's a lesson for us. Somewheres in this, if we utilize it, it'll work out good for us, rather than be a storm, because God knows the end from the beginning. So my hope in summary, as I brought this, or thought about this week, my hope is that we can know that when the storms of life come, we can practice letting Him be in control. And we can have peace of mind that He knows what's on the opposite shore. He knows what's on the opposite shore. I talk a good game. Sometimes I don't practice a good game. Sometimes I don't even talk a good game, but anyway, I try. I was a little bit surprised when they had special prayers that none of you didn't ask for prayer for yourself because Wes was speaking, but anyway. So, that is, I think that should be our prayer, that we can learn through whatever trials we're going through, whatever storms we're facing. If you'd stand, I close this in a word of prayer. Father, we know that this story is a true story, and it relates to our everyday life as well. We know that we use the word storm as a metaphor for things that we're going through that are not particularly desirable. And we know that while we don't like to let loose of the reins sometimes, you are in control. Help us to balance our desire to work for you and the desire to having you have total control. Lord, that is a balance that we always have to work on in our personal lives and in our corporate lives. And we just pray that that will be something on our minds and something that we work for. Lord, I ask you to bless these people, give them safety as they travel home. Watch over and protect, and we'll give you the glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Lord,